Now let's look at generated code kind of from a software development prospect. You're a software engineer in a large company, and you're now using this tool, LLM, be it through Copilot or whatever. How do you integrate this into your normal just software development lifecycle, SDLC as it's often called? So you're probably dealing with code management, SCM, such as GitHub repository, something like that. You're going to have these prompts. How do you capture these prompts as something that further developers who come after you on this particular project can make sense of what you've done and possibly change the generated code? I really do think that at some point, the tools like GitHub repository, these kind of things, they will provide a way that you can provide the prompt that was used to actually generate the underlying code. But for now, you typically will put this in some way, either as a file, a text file that goes along with your source code, or maybe as comments in the actual code itself. Let me know in the comments, what do you do with your prompts that generate all this marvelous code that you're now somewhat dependent on? Do you just lose them? I have to admit, I've done that in some cases, but I usually put them somewhere in the comments. So we're going to continue from before and use the code that I have here. This code is basically, it makes use of OpenAI, and you could easily adapt it to other things because it's all using LangChain, and LangChain easily lets you switch that out. But the OpenAI API comes from here, so it's basically in your keys if you happen to be using Google Colab. So right now it's installing everything that I need, and I will simply scroll down below this. And these are the kinds of, if you're using this for something more than just an example or something to hand in to your professor like me, these are the kind of things that you'll want to put in. I set it up here. Basically, you'll want to load the system prompt down with your coding standards. Little things you may not even think about, like for computer vision, do you want to use OpenCV or do you want to use something else like Pill or other things like that? For HTTP requests, do you want to be using the URL or do you want to be using requests? Because if you don't tell it, it's just going to kind of flip-flop between these, and you'll end up with all kinds of different Python libraries on a large software project. And then you'll want to also put in things like PEP8 and probably like import sorting, things like that. Just things that are important to a coding standard. So let's go ahead and run that. And then if you're going to write a prompt for something substantial, other than having all that baked into the system prompt, you also want to be very specific. Here I am creating a clipping function. Write a Python function named saveClipped using the PEP8 style guide. Now that's redundant because I do have that in the system prompt, but nonetheless, this function should accept 5 parameters: CV2 image, X, Y, width and height, and background. You might also want to specify the types for each of these and specify in the system prompt if you want it to use Python typing. You know how you can do variable name, colon, and then the type. Some companies really like that as part of it. And then I describe what the function should do. And it describes this. Basically, what I'm doing is I say that I want to clip a smaller rectangle and a bigger rectangle, but what happens if that rectangle overlaps the edge of it somewhere? In that case, it should still be able to function. This is an actual function that I made use of in a program. And if it is at the edge, that's why that background color is there. That is needed. So it creates it. It gives me really some nice comments describing what it's created. And basically, that is it. Now, how do you test it? This is certainly an open question. Should you let the large language model create your unit tests for you, or should you do that as part of your specification, just so that you really are sure that it's doing what you actually intended? The interesting thing is, if you write well enough unit tests, you can actually, for the most part, typically have the large language model regenerate the code just from the unit test. That means that your unit test is truly exercising it correctly and thoroughly. So we can try out the generated code. Here is the code that it generated. And you can basically run that. And then I created some testing for it. So like this code here basically tests it. So we take the original image. I just create a grayscale. And then we're specifying red as the background. So if we clip it within bounds, obviously it's just going to all be a part of this. You can tell that this is zoomed in just a little bit to here. If I clip at the edge, then you're going to have some edge area where basically it has to fill something in. So I've clipped it probably right about here, and it needs to fill in this. Now, if you clip it completely outside of bounds, like we're trying to clip, like if I say, let's clip a rectangle, whack, completely across there, then it's going to have background that it needs to fill in across the entire thing, like a picture frame. So these 4 were the cases that I could think of where you needed a unit test. You might also want to try this little L-shaped thing at each side, because there's 4 different sides that could come in. It could imagine rotating that L completely around, and there's 4 different configurations there. You may want to test all of those, no pun intended, but that's truly an edge case. And then you provide the unit tests. This is where I wrote these unit tests. And this is standard PyUnit that would test all of these situations. And that basically is kind of start to finish how I would create this function. And I did create this function for a program that I'm working on. And by specifying the names of the parameters, the name of the function, if I make a change to this later and need to regenerate it, most likely the large language model is not going to introduce what you call a breaking change, which is where it changes the name of the function, the name of the parameters, something like that. The breaking change is really what you want to try to limit, that any changes that the large language model, these large language models, you give it just the prompt, it's going to potentially change variable names, change everything. You've got to lock it down so that you don't have a breaking change. All right, thank you for watching this video, and definitely subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date with everything that I do with artificial intelligence. Thank you for watching.